Welcome to the Hometime Project Center. I'm Dean Johnson.
And I'm Peggy Knapp. In the video you're about to see, we'll be showing you what's involved in finish carpentry. Dean and I will be giving you step-by-step instructions for finishing out a home or a room with door and window casings,
Installing baseboards, ceiling coving, and wainscoting.
and in the process we'll be showing you how to use the power miter, the router, and a table saw for creating your own molding.
Hometime is made possible by Chevrolet, who brings you full-size Chevy vans with full-size room and hauling power. Chevy Suburban. No car-type wagon can do as much. Full-size Blazer at home and backcountry or on a city street. Full-size Chevy pickups. Full-size tough for full-size jobs. The heartbeat of America. Today's Chevy trucks.
This video is just one in a library of instructional programs designed to assist the viewer in working on a wide range of home improvement projects. And before we begin our program, I want to explain how you can best make use of this educational system. First off, you should watch the tape all the way through to get an idea of the methods, the steps, and the terminology we use. To help familiarize yourself with the terms, we've included a glossary in the project guide. Then you should review the tape again, only this time, check with your project guide to determine the tools and materials appropriate to your project. Then take the project guide to your local building supply dealer or home center. The people there will be able to assist you, answer questions, and direct you to what you need.
Our finish carpentry program will focus on the millwork that's applied to the interior of your house for both functional and aesthetic reasons. Millwork is wood that's been shaped to a specified pattern. It can be divided into two basic types: trim and molding. Trim, also called casing, refers to the wood that frames interior and exterior openings, such as doors and windows. Molding is wood that's been shaped or patterned and is generally used to give a room a finished look. You'll find trim and molding in both softwood and hardwood. The most common woods used for this purpose are pine, oak, and birch. There's also trims available today made of laminated woods and particle board with a hardwood veneer. The lamination helps prevent the wood from bowing or warping, and it also makes for a less expensive product than the full-grain hardwood. Your molding and trim pattern selection will, of course, depend on the architecture of your house and the look you want to achieve with stain, paint, or varnish. Now, if you're trying to match dated existing millwork, well, you might want to talk with the specialty wood suppliers in your vicinity to see if it's available or if it might have to be milled. And also, in estimating for your millwork, it's a good idea to add 10% onto your materials total to allow for waste.
A key to successful finish work is in using the appropriate tool for the job. If you're planning to do a large woodworking project, you may want to invest in some power tools. In many cases, power tools are faster and more accurate than hand tools.
But in either case, when you're buying tools, look for quality. The old saying, "you get what you pay for," was probably the direct quote of a woodworker who thought he was getting a great deal on a saw.
Many of your tool and equipment needs can be handled at your local rental store. Some building supply companies may also rent equipment too. Now, let's take a look at the hand and power tools we'll be using for our finished carpentry projects. A tape measure, a coping saw, a wooden miter box, a metal miter box, a power miter, a router table, a finish hammer, a cordless drill or electric drill, a block plane, and a 4-in-hand rasp. Now, before we begin, I want to remind you that no matter how simple or extensive your project is, always be safety conscious. Wear the proper clothing and protection, and follow the manufacturer's guidelines and specifications when using their tools, materials, and equipment.
Well, that's our introduction to finish carpentry. Pretty impressive.
We'd like to introduce you to something else impressive, our new Chevy full-size pickup.
I can tell you I'm impressed with the room and comfort.
This is a totally new pickup from the bottom up. It's built on a new full-size frame with a boxed front section for strength.
And the pickup box is a new design too, with depressions above the wheel wells so you can do some double-deck loading.
So don't let the aerodynamic styling fool you. You're looking at a tough, full-size pickup that carries full-size loads. The new Chevy pickup has new rear-wheel anti-lock brakes, a good feature to have on wet or icy roads. The more you look into the new Chevy pickup, the more impressive it becomes. A completely new kind of work truck.
Just like good finish carpentry, full of great details and touches, like hidden drip gutters and the available body-molded seats for real comfort over the long haul. There's comfort for the eyes, too. Over 1,000 square inches of increased visibility.
The new full-size Chevy pickup. One more reason people say, nothing works like a Chevy truck.
We're going to begin by installing some oak Princeton casing on an interior door. Now, the Princeton pattern is a common style of casing. Another common style is the ranch style, which has a simple curved pattern.
But don't let your choice be limited to just two styles. Millwork can be whatever appeals to you or fits the decor of your home, from straight 1x3 boards to more elaborate millwork that you can have custom milled or shape yourself.
This profile shows how the Princeton casing has a slightly tapered face and a pattern milled along the width of it. The narrower side is installed along the door side of the frame, set back 1/4 inch from the jamb to allow room for the hinge pins and the strike plate. This setback, also called the reveal, frames the doorway with a visual shadow line. In preparation for installing the trim, you'll want to consider what kind of finish you'll have. Whether it's paint, stain, or a transparent finish, you might want to apply it to the molding before you install it. It's easier to apply the finish when the molding is on the table. And in the end, it'll save you a little time.
We'll start off by installing one side first, then the top, then the other side. The first step is to measure the height of the opening and add 1/4 inch for the reveal. This will give us the inside dimension of the miter cut.
Normally, the trim is installed before the carpet or the vinyl flooring is laid down. So for the side casing, you measure right from the floor. You got that?
Yeah.
All right. But if the carpet is already down, measure from the carpet and then give yourself a little bit extra so that the casing sinks below the nap level.
Now, I'm measuring in on the jamb 1/4 inch. And with a utility knife, I'm making a mark that will serve as a guide for when I'm installing the casing.
With the height dimension marked on the piece of trim, we're ready to make a 45-degree angle cut using a wooden miter box and a back saw. The miter box has slotted sides for making clean, accurate square and angle cuts. Now I'll raise the piece of trim up using a piece of scrap wood to protect the wooden base from the saw blade. Now I'll set the trim against the back of the box and align my mark to the 45-degree angle slot. Then using the saw blade as a guide, I align my mark to the 45-degree slot. Setting the back saw into the slot, you start with a couple backward cuts, holding the trim down tight. Then with the cut established, progressively tip the saw so that the back is horizontal to the work and make smooth, even strokes. Now for the other end, you want to cut it square to the floor. The back saw is specially designed for cutting joints. It differs from a regular hand saw. The teeth are finer, and there are more teeth per inch. It also has a reinforced steel back edge that eliminates any flexing of the blade that could affect the accuracy of the cut.
Oak has a tendency to split when nailed, so we're going to drill pilot holes into the trim to lessen the resistance. Now this step isn't necessary if you're using pine. I set the trim up to the marks I made, making sure that the reveal is uniform. The drill bit I'm using has a slightly smaller diameter than the nail shank. An alternative to the drill bit is to use one of the finishing nails.
The trim is nailed to the door jamb and the framing members. For going through the drywall and into the jack stud, we're using 6-penny nails. For nailing into the jamb, we're using 4-penny nails.
Down the inside or visible edge of the trim, I'm setting a nail every 12 inches. Along the thicker outside edge, it's every 16 inches. I don't drive the nails flush, not yet. I don't want to risk denting the wood. I'll come back after the trim is installed and countersink the nails. Now for the top trim. We'll be making 2 mitered corners. Now since the side trim's already on, we'll be taking the measurement for the top trim from the inside of the trim over to the jamb and adding 1/4 inch for our reveal on the right-hand side.
Now we want to show you another kind of miter box, only this one is made of metal. It has a calibrated guide for setting the angle and a saw guide onto which the saw mounts. For making a 45-degree miter cut, I just move it into the setting where it clicks into place, then cut. To make sure you get a tight-fitting joint, align the trim so that you're cutting on the outside edge of the line. The goal here is to create a flush joint. To get an accurate measurement, make the first cut at one end of the length of trim. Then measure from the inside edge of that first cut and mark for the second angle. Now for the other side. In some cases, you'll find that the jamb isn't straight or the miter cut isn't clean. If the joint isn't flush, you may find that the wood touches at the top, but there's a gap at the bottom, or the other way around. Then you'll want to correct it by remitering the corner or by using a block plane.
A block plane is a small plane that fits in the palm of your hand. To set the cutting blade for shaving down a mitered edge, I adjust the knob for a low angle. Then holding it flat on the miter, I make very fine, thin cuts, working on the high end where the wood was touching, and checking the joint often to make sure I don't shave off too much. Planing should always be done on a loose piece, as opposed to the trim that's been anchored to the wall. Now it's very easy to mar the surface of the wood with a hammer by driving the nail flush to the wood. So to avoid this, I hammer the nail to where the head is just above the surface. Then taking a nail set and placing it on the head of the nail, perpendicular to the wood, I give it a couple of quick raps with a hammer. These depressions can be filled with colored putty or wood dough, depending on the finished look you're after. Now, if the nail head isn't set deep enough, the putty has a tendency to pop out.
For installing window casing, the same basic principles apply, only here we have to cut an extra piece for along the bottom. I'll start at the right-hand side and work around the window counterclockwise. For the first length of trim, I'll add 1/2 inch to the inside measurement to allow for the 1/4 inch reveal on both ends. To the other measurements, I'll add just the 1/4 inch. For cutting window trim, I want to show you another miter tool. It's called a power miter saw. It cuts quickly and accurately, and it's highly recommended for people who will be doing extensive finish carpentry. It's basically a circular saw that's pulled down to cut the wood. Like a circular saw, there are a number of different blades available designed for specific cutting applications. For miter joints, we're using a carbide-tipped cross-cut blade. Although more expensive than the regular steel saw blade, the carbide blade will stay sharper longer. A tip when using a power miter is to raise it up off the table on blocks of wood. This allows space for the sawdust to build up without clogging the mechanism. For cutting miter joints, loosen and pivot the handle to the 45-degree stop on the table gauge. Then slide the trim board in against the fence so that the short angle of the miter is toward the outside. As with other power saws, the power miter commands a great deal of respect. Accidents can happen, especially if you're in a hurry or if you're preoccupied with other matters. If and when you do operate a power miter, wear safety glasses and keep your fingers and clothing away from the cutting blade. Another safety measure that we recommend is to check the guard to make sure it's operating smoothly before you turn on the saw.
Our next finished carpentry project is to install the baseboards. We'll be showing you two types, a single-piece more contemporary style and a three-piece traditional style. Baseboard is attached to the base of the wall around the perimeter of the room, where it's nailed into the sole plate and the wall studs. For our room here, we're going to match the window and door casing using a Princeton-style oak base. The base is a 1/2 inch thick and stands 2 7/8 inch high. It has a flat front with a curved top, which will call for some extra cutting with a coping saw to make a clean curved inside corner joint. One end of the base will butt against the wall, while the adjoining base will be cut to accept the shape of the wood.
The first thing to do before you cut and attach the base is to plan out the order of the installation. Now, ideally, you want to take your measurement from a butt end or a wall as opposed to the coped end. We'll begin at this wall, attaching the length of base to span the full dimension with a butt joint at each end.
Before attaching the baseboard, we establish the location of the studs for our nailing points. Since this room will later be carpeted, we're going to raise the base off the subfloor a 1/2 inch, using a 1/2 inch plywood shim as a prop. We fit our first length of base to the wall, shim up a 1/2 inch, and with a drill, make pilot holes at the stud locations. Then drive the finishing nails. Here again, I only want to drive them part way. Later, after all the base is in, we'll countersink the nails with a nail set and fill the holes with wood dough.
Now for this adjacent wall, we'll need to make a coped joint. An easy way to get a clean fit is to take a length of trim longer than the span of the wall and cut the joint first. Then after you've established the fit, then you cut the excess off the butt end. And I'll show you how. As we mentioned earlier, our Princeton base will require 2 cuts. First, a 45-degree miter cut. Then with a coping saw, I back miter it, holding the base steady and turning the handle as I saw to follow the profile. This contour line is also called the arris, and it's important to saw as close as possible to the line without wavering. This way the end will fit flush around the other molding.
A coping saw is a handy tool to have for making curved or interior cuts in wood. The fine-toothed blade is inserted into the 2 holder pins, which can be tightened by turning the handle. For making interior cuts, you first detach the blade, insert it through a pre-drilled hole in the wood, then reconnect it to the frame and make the cut.
Now for smoothing out the irregularities of the coped cut, you can use a 4-in-hand rasp. It has 4 different abrasive edges, and it works well on a variety of surfaces. With the base cut, set it in place to see how it fits. Then make a square cut on the other end to fit up against the wall. Then just finish off the rest of the room.
In purchasing your molding, you'll find that the more elaborate the pattern, the more it'll cost. Most molding is sold by the linear foot in lengths from 6 to 16 feet. It's always best to buy it in full lengths that will span the full dimension you want to cover. Now, should you come up short and have to splice two pieces together, a good way to join them is with a bevel cut. You have to set the miter at 30 degrees to cut a beveled joint. With the butt joint, there's an obvious shadow line where one ends and the other begins. With the bevel joint, one end overlaps the other end, and the joint becomes less visible. And should there be any shrinkage in the wood, it will not show up as much because there's wood behind the joint. To make the cuts, we'll bring the first piece of base in from the left side and the adjoining piece from the right side. Remember that the joint should be located on a stud. When installing the base, angle the drilled pilot holes toward the joint. This way, all 4 nails will land in the stud, plus the angling helps draw the bevel joint together.
Another place that needs a mitered joint is an outside corner. Now the process is basically the same, but instead of making an inside 45-degree angle miter, we'll be making an outside miter. You may find that in the process of taping the drywall, a buildup of joint compound was left on an inside or an outside corner. This buildup makes mitering a clean 45-degree joint almost impossible. Also, on outside corners, there's a metal corner bead that can also affect the angle. In any case, if your corner isn't a true 90-degree angle, then you'll have to adjust your miter to accommodate. A power miter is made so that you can go beyond the 45-degree mark and lock the blade to whatever setting you need. So make your first cut a 45, then cut the adjoining miter to whatever angle you need to make a flush joint.
An old-fashioned style of molding combines 3 elements: a straight baseboard, or in this case, a 1x6 piece of oak, end cap molding that sits on top of the baseboard, and base shoe, or quarter-round molding that finishes off the bottom edge. To install it, you locate the flat base first, then the cap molding, taking care with pre-drilling and nailing because of the fragility of the wood. Next, install the base shoe, nailing into the baseboard and not the floor. Our shoe is 3/4 inch by 1/2 inch, and the 3/4 inch side is placed against the base.
Our next project is to install molding around the ceiling. Now there are 2 standard types, cove and crown molding. We've chosen cove. The application is pretty much the same as for baseboards, only of course we'll be working up off the floor. In preparation for the cove molding, we went around the ceiling, locating the wall studs for nailing points, marking lightly with a pencil just below the depth of the cove. Then we made the miters, supporting the ends of the wood with sawhorses. In cutting cove, it's important to place the molding on the miter table the same way it's to be installed. Holding the cove flat on the table with the wall side edge to the back fence of the saw. Then set the molding up in position. Pre-drill for the finishing nails and nail the cove around the room.
Now we want to show you an interesting hardwood floor application. In the lower room addition, we're installing a floor made up of tongue and groove oak boards. The interesting thing about this floor is that we're gluing the boards directly to the concrete floor using a special adhesive. We've applied the adhesive about 1/4 inch thick using a notched trowel. Then we've allowed 1 hour setup time for the adhesive to become tacky. We lay the planks, inserting the tongue and groove of the previous. These are pre-finished 4-foot by 3/8 inch planks that can be glued to wood, concrete, and resilient tile, providing that the subfloor is clean, level, and above all, dry. Now here along the wall, we're leaving a 1/4 inch gap for expansion. This will later be covered with a baseboard and base shoe. Now, we want to show you another application for oak planks. In the room addition, we're installing oak planks on the cathedral ceiling. For the ceiling application, we're installing 1/4 inch plywood to the existing drywall and nailing into the framing members. The plywood will provide the planks with a continuous backing for the adhesive and also provide a good nailing surface.
The planks come in random lengths from 12 to 60 inches, and we'll be installing them lengthwise, parallel to the peak, staggering the joints as we go. We'll start our installation here at the peak and work all the way down one side and then go back and attach the other side. To ensure a good bond, we're troweling the underlayment with the same adhesive we used on the floor, again allowing 1 hour setup time. First, we align the plank along a mason's line that we located by measuring down from the peak on both ends of the addition the width of a plank. Although we're running our planks parallel to the peak, we could just as well be installing them from the wall to the peak, diagonally, or in a herringbone pattern.
How's it looking there? Okay. You want to get that end one? To seat the tongue into the groove, I tap a scrap piece of oak against the plank with a rubber mallet, then nail. Once the rows are established, it's just a matter of applying the mastic, staggering the seams, and blind nailing.
Since our last rows will be hidden behind the soffit, we don't need to concern ourselves with cutting a border plank to fit to the wall. If we did, we'd want to plan the installation so that the last row wasn't a sliver cut. In order to form a neat joint here at the peak, we're going to shape the grooved side edge to an angle that will accommodate the peak. To do this, we're going to shave off the back of the groove using a table saw. Being 3/8 inch thick, we won't need to shave much off the plank. With the ridge row up, we can move down the rows, following the same procedure as the other side. Another project for the 3/8 inch oak planks was to install wainscoting 4 feet up the wall around a room. So let's take a look at what this job entailed. The first step was to apply 1/4 inch plywood underlayment as a backing to glue and secure the planks. Since plywood comes in 4 by 8 foot panels, this step in the operation went fast. The next step was to establish the widths of the corner planks. First, we measured the length of the wall. Then divided the total 151 inches by 3, the width of each plank. This gave us 50 1/3, the total number of planks needed to cover the wall. Now, rather than make a sliver cut for the extra third of a plank, we added it to another, giving us 4 inches. Divided that by 2, and this gave us the width of the corner planks. So starting in the corner, we glued the plank with the cut side to the corner, which will be hidden by the adjoining wall. With the corner plank attached, we don't have to concern ourselves with staggering any joints, since they run vertically, pre-cut to 48 inches. To cut for a window opening, measure down from the top of the previous plank, then mark, cut, and locate. Once the planks were installed, we then applied an oak baseboard, nailing it through the wainscoting to the studs, and followed that with a base shoe. Then to the top of the planks, we applied a cap molding that we also nailed to the studs.
There are many decorative patterns you can use when installing molding. We've shown you two common types of window, door, and baseboard molding. What we'd like to do now is show you how you can create your own pattern with the help of a router. Router cutting bits are attached to the chuck at the bottom of the shaft. There are cutting bits for making a wide variety of shapes and patterns, for rounding edges, chamfering, rabbiting, and coving, as well as creating V-grooves and straight channels in a board. For our base molding, we'll be using the classic OG router bit, which will give us this shape. The procedure for fitting the bit into the chuck will depend on the particular machine, but one step is the same, and that is to pull a plug from the power supply before you attach it. Once the bit is tightly fitted and all the way in, I can adjust the depth by lowering it to the desired setting and then tightening the base clamp. Okay, now for a trial run. It's always good to test it out first on some scrap wood to see if it's the depth you want. In every case, your work should be clamped and your eyes protected. Okay, it's close, but I want the cut to be a little deeper for more definition. That's it. Now onto the oak base shoe. The best place to start your router is well ahead of the finish work. When starting, the router has a tendency to kick, and you don't want to mar your work. So be sure and keep the bit away from the wood when starting the motor. Wait for the motor to reach operating speed and firmly grip the handles. Now, in cutting, you want to move the router at an even speed, feeding it into the work. The tip of the router bit rolls along the wood, guiding the cut. The router bit spins in a clockwise motion, and to get a clean, smooth cut, you want to work the router from the left to the right. Besides the number of bits you can choose from, the router also comes with a fence attachment to guide you in cutting grooves and dados. For extensive routering projects, you may want to consider a router table. Basically, it's comprised of a router that's been mounted upside down, under a table so that the bit protrudes through a hole. A fence is then anchored or clamped to the tabletop with a notch for the router bit. The material is fed into the bit from right to left. A safety tip when working on a router table is to keep fingers away from the bit. So when routering, use the protractor or a scrap piece of wood to push the material all the way past the cutting bit. Then you can rip the routed oak on the table saw to finish the job.
Now we want to show you how to install a unique type of interior door, a bifold closet door. The first step is to install the jamb to accommodate a 4-foot door. The jamb consists of particle board that's been laminated with an oak veneer. To assemble, carefully align the corners and secure with 1.5-inch bugle head screws. Then place the jamb in the rough opening, resting the sides on 3/8 of an inch shims that represent the finished floor height. Now shim the side jamb, positioning one shim from each side. Then check for plumb and secure with 8-penny finishing nails, taking care to nail through the shims into the framing member. Particular care must be taken while shimming to accurately plumb each side jamb and square the angle where the head and side jamb meet, so the bifold door operates smoothly within the opening. The final step is to score the excess shims with a utility knife, then snap them off flush with the edges of the jamb. Now let's go to a finished closet to install the set of bifold doors. Here we'll be installing a set of bifolds to fit a 6-foot opening. The first step is to center the sliding track within the head jamb and secure it into position with screws. Next, attach the jamb bracket at the base of the side jamb, again centering it within the jamb. This bracket can be adjusted left or right so that it lines up directly below the overhead track. Once that's done, it can then be secured permanently into the jamb and floor. Then, resting the doors on sawhorses, you can insert the top and bottom pivots into the pre-drilled holes. The vinyl slides can now be inserted into the track, making sure that they slide easily. The door is placed into position with the top pivot placed in the top track first. Then, lifting the doors, depress the top pivot and slide the bottom pivot into the lower jamb bracket. Now the final step is to install the bifold stop along the head jamb and both side jambs. Well, so far we've shown you several different types of molding, from base cap to quarter round to ceiling cove. Well, now we want to show you a particular home furnishing that combines many of these features and more. The first step is to mark for the outline of the mantelpiece on the wall. These marks will serve to locate the 2x4 nailers once we deduct the width of the top and sides of the mantel. Now, to scribe the top of the mantel, we set the compass to the width of the widest separation between the wall and the top. Then we draw the compass across the back, transferring any irregularities in the surface of the wall to the mantel's top. Then, using a belt sander, we can now remove the waste up to the scribed line. Then, measuring in for the width of the top and sides, we can locate and secure the 3 nailers using wood screws.
Right there.
The final step is to replace the mantel and secure it to the nailers with finishing nails. Well, now we can put the finishing touches onto the mantelpiece, applying a stain and then a protective coat of varnish.
That also finishes up our program. Hopefully you've learned a few things about finished carpentry.
Hometime is made possible by Chevrolet, who brings you Chevy Suburban, America's superwagon, Chevy Astro, the van that can, S10 Blazer, America's most popular sport utility vehicle, full-size Chevy pickups, full-size tough for full-size jobs. The heartbeat of America, today's Chevy trucks.
I'm Peggy Knapp.
And I'm Dean Johnson. So long.